Good morning, everybody. I trust you all got a great night's sleep. I love coming up into the mountains. The mountains have such fresh, crisp air, and it's invigorating. So we're going to try something a little bit different this morning. We're going to look at the world through a little different lens. And I'm going to start off with a scenario. And this is a scenario about the Nobel Peace Prize. So a little over 2 years into the future, 2022, the Norwegian Nobel Committee decides that they want to do something different for selecting the winners of the Nobel Peace Prize. So with the introduction of blockchain, next generation blockchain, we're going to be able to do elections. And so with a blockchain-based voting system, they're going to ask the world to decide who the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize should be. So their goal is to inspire a new age of peace. So the Nobel Committee has a responsibility to try to create peace all over the world. And they want to use this voting system as a mechanism for doing that. So they want to promote peace throughout everywhere in the world. And so they start with a panel of 4 nominees. So they'll pick 4 people that go onto the ballot. They announce 60 days before the election. It's a 24-hour election cycle, and you can cast your vote through any phones or tablet computers or any electronic device and make your vote count. So this is part of their peace mandate. They're trying to promote peace around the world. And so they don't want people to just pick a name off the list. They want people to know something a little bit more about every one of the candidates, so they pre-test people before the voting. And what they do is they ask 2 questions of each of the candidates. Now, these are not questions that are going to trip up anybody. These are questions just to kind of force people to learn a little bit more about each of the candidates. And each person gets 4 attempts. They get 4 tries at getting it answered right. So then the election day comes, the winner gets announced, and 740 million people have voted around the world from 163 different countries, and suddenly the winner becomes the most famous person on planet Earth. Now, when you think about this scenario, this seems entirely doable. We're just months away from being able to do something like this. This, I think, opens the door for all kinds of other things. If you think this is kind of a stretch, in 2017, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio, actually, they held an election to decide who the new inductees for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame should be, and they got 1.8 million votes cast to decide who the new music group should be that got inducted into that Hall of Fame. So this has already been tried. That was pretty crude technology. Now it's getting much better. But there's other possibilities. This can be used for so many different things. First of all, we could be selecting the Time Magazine Person of the Year if everybody participates. We could select the site of the next Olympics and have a much fairer process. There's too much corruption in the Olympic Committee there. We could select the site of the next World Cup. But there's also things can go wrong. Suddenly, somebody might want to sponsor an election to select who the new leader of the world should be. It's probably not going to go over very well. We could be casting votes on who owns the moon. It's probably not going to go over very well. And we could vote on who owns different islands in the Pacific Ocean, or setting policies like should we ban plastic bottles all over the world. We can have lots of interesting elections as a result of this, and these are cross-border elections. So we don't have to worry about being inside of a certain country. These are elections that can span anywhere in the world. But the key question that this raises then, at what point does the number of votes constitute a new global mandate? At what point do the leaders of the world have to pay attention because so many people have weighed in on this topic and they've cast their vote, they've made a decision that this is the way they would like to see things happen, that the leaders of the world have to pay attention to them? This becomes a really interesting question. So the questions I'm going to ask right now, and we'll get more questions at the end here, but how will blockchain-based global voting systems be used in business and industry in the future? In the end, this becomes kind of a new marketing tool in lots of interesting ways. And how will it change the nature of democratic systems and government control? I think these are great questions to think about. See, we're entering a world that will be defined by scalability, because things in a digital world, things scale very quickly. So it took over 200 years to reach the first billion bicycles in the world. So there was a lot of bicycles that started a couple hundred years ago, and so it took around 200 years to reach the first billion bicycles. It took about 120 years to reach the first billion cars. That was in roughly 2010. And I'm sure there was some guy out there counting every car. It took 23 years for McDonald's to sell the first billion hamburgers. It took 8.5 years for Facebook to reach the first billion users. It took 5.5 years for Uber to sell the first billion rides. But Uber has a competitor in China, Didi Chuxing, and Didi, it took them a little over 11 months to reach the first billion rides in China. Now, this isn't the record, though. The record was actually set by this crazy guy. He's the one that broke the first billion views on YouTube. And this was in 2012. Psy got to a billion views on YouTube, and it took him 157 days with this Gangnam Style video. Now, that set a new world record, and then since that time, since 2012, there's been over 100 other musical artists and TV stars that have broken through the billion view record. Yeah, Adele did it in the least amount of time. She did it in 87 days. So we're setting the stage for big things. So we're scaling up very rapidly. So this is setting the stage for big things to happen all over the world. And the future of business is going to range from the micro businesses, the micro industries that we talked about yesterday, to the mega projects in the future. Now, this is really important to pay attention to, because as jobs start to disappear, countries are going to get very nervous, and they're going to want to invest heavily in really big projects that keep people employed. And so we're going to start seeing things like this crop out of the woodwork. So because we have this scalability ability to tackle big things, I wrote these 3 laws of exponential capabilities. Now, the first law, I'll just go through these rather quickly here, but with automation, every exponential decrease in effort creates an equal and opposite exponential increase in capabilities. So I'll give you an example of that. Sorry, I don't have this in kilometers here. In 1850, the average transportation speed in the world was roughly 6 kilometers an hour. And so over a lifetime, somebody would travel roughly 110,000 kilometers over their entire lifetime. So how did we get around? By 1900, that doubled to roughly 12 kilometers an hour. And then in 1950, it scaled up even more to roughly 36 kilometers an hour. Now, because of lots of people flying around the world, then by 2000, people were averaging roughly 110 kilometers an hour. And then by 2050, if you're following this trend line, by 2050, we should be averaging somewhere around 336 kilometers per hour. And over our lifetime, we will travel roughly 11 million kilometers. That's a 100-fold increase over 200 years. So how are we going to do that? Law number 2, as we raise the bar for our achievements, we also reset the norm for our expectations. So as things get easier to do, we just expect that we'll be able to accomplish much more in our lives. And then law number 3, as significant accomplishments become more common, mega accomplishments will take their place. So we will no longer be satisfied with just incremental improvement. We want major improvement in the future. So what are some of these mega projects? I always think of mega projects as anything over $1 billion. So there's lots of things that are way more than $1 billion now. So I'll just touch on these 8 mega projects here that I think are highly probable that we're going to tackle these over the coming years. So the first one is 4 bridges, then colonizing Mars, then tube transportation, floating islands, mass energy storage, global Wi-Fi, whole Earth genealogy project, and the global blockchain infrastructure. So if we look at a map of the world, there are 4 bridge projects that have been proposed many years ago, but we've never actually given the green light to tackle them. The first one is across the Bering Strait. It would connect Asia with North America. Now, this is a significant distance, and it would be a significant engineering feat to actually create these bridges, but it's not impossible. It's entirely doable. The next one is there's a section that has never gotten a road built between North and South America. This is known as the Darien Gap. It's about 40 kilometers long, and it could be bridged through the ocean, but it's entirely doable. The third one would be to connect Japan with Korea, to make it so that people in Japan can drive to the rest of the continent. Then we still have the North Korea problem there, but we'll get past that sometime along the way. And then the fourth one is the Gibraltar Bridge Tunnel, which would connect Europe with Africa. So this is the longest bridge project in the world today. This is one that connects Hong Kong with Macau. It's 55 kilometers long, and it's quite the engineering feat, and this is about what it would take to build between each of those gaps that I showed you just a bit ago. So colonizing Mars. I don't know if any of you want to live on Mars, but this is a rather interesting goal that a lot of people in the world have today. So let's go through this scenario here. In 2024, Elon Musk plans to launch the first manned ship to Mars. It takes 7 months to get there. That's a long time. In 2026, the people of Mars establish themselves as a self-governing planet. So it may only be 8 people on Mars, but they decide to establish Mars as their own government, as a separate planet from planet Earth. In 2028, work begins to build the first Mars colony. According to Elon Musk, it's going to take over 1,000 spaceships going there over quite a few years to actually make this colony, but they're going to begin fairly early. In 2030, as the demands for colonizing Mars skyrocket, there's going to be lots of people that want to go there. So Mars leaders devise a plan to fund the building of Mars. And they do that by 2032, then they start offering land on Mars for sale on Earth. The land on Mars becomes the first thing that they can monetize on that planet. So how will the sale of land on Mars affect real estate sales on Earth? You have something else you can invest in. Is this a good investment? There's more land on Mars than there is on Earth. So it's going to be cheap. It's going to be cheap. But it's going to be hard to get there, though. So we get into this central question of, do we live on an overpopulated planet or an underpopulated universe? Because once we can establish a colony on Mars, then the sky's the limit. We can go anywhere in the universe that we want to, theoretically, and it's going to be a lot of work, but we've already established a new base on another planet. So how will this sale of land on Mars affect sale of land on Earth? So the third one is the tube transportation project. Most of you have heard about the Hyperloop projects. A Hyperloop is tube transportation that you can put a vehicle in there and you can go super fast anywhere in the world. Now, as soon as we have a successful project, and it'll probably happen between Dubai and Abu Dhabi, there's pilot projects going on literally all over the world, but we're going to have a successful project somewhere in the coming months. And as soon as that happens, then every country in the world is going to line up and they're going to want to have tubes that come to all of their major cities. This then suddenly becomes potentially the world's largest infrastructure project. Something like an 80 to 100-year build-out. It'll take that long to build tube transportation tunnels all over the world, and it will employ hundreds of millions of people. It'll cost trillions of dollars, but it'll all pay for itself as it goes. Now, countries will want to invest in this because this will keep people employed. This is a different type of employment. So if we're building tube transportation systems around the world, ask yourself the question, what skills are people going to need to work in that environment in the future? It's still a big unknown at this point. All right, floating islands. This idea of building islands in the ocean, that I think this will be driven by the cruise industry. So the big cruise ships are looking for unique places to take people, and they could easily build their own islands that are floating somewhere around the world. And this country here, Oceanics, has come up with a design for floating islands that will survive a Category 5 hurricane. So these are very durable floating islands, and once you start piecing these all together, you can create entire cities on the ocean. Now this becomes a whole new environment. It becomes an entire new industry. And once again, countries will likely start investing in things like this because it creates a whole new industry and it creates entire new jobs. So once again, if you have students going through school today and you think about them going into a floating island industry in the future, what type of skills do you need to do that? Mass energy storage. On planet Earth, we're very good at producing energy. We produce lots and lots of energy, only we're really bad at storing energy from one day to the next. And so lots of our energy goes to waste because we don't know how to store it from one day to the next. So once we develop mass energy storage systems like this energy farm that's in Australia, this is the largest one in the world today. Once we start doing that, these will start cropping up all over the world. Every major city, lots of countries will invest in mass energy storage systems, and these then will help us power the world, and we'll stop using so many resources to create power if we can store it from one day to the next. Once again, if you have people in school today that are going to work in an industry like this in the future, ask yourself, what are the skills that they're going to need to actually work in a field like this? Global Wi-Fi. There are several companies right now that want to participate in the global Wi-Fi systems. Samsung is one, Amazon is one, SpaceX is one, and so there's several other ones out there that are going to be shooting up lots of satellites into space, and this will give us the ability to connect with people all over the world. Now, over the next few years, we're going to see literally thousands and thousands of satellites that make it so that we can connect with our phone to any place in the world, to people in other places in the world. That's a big piece that's missing from our communication network right now. Once again, if you have students that want to work in a field like this in the future, what skills are they going to need to do that? The Whole Earth Genealogy Project. Right now, today, we have the ability to scan somebody's DNA and to understand where they fit in the whole genealogical map for all of humanity. So we have the ability today to start creating an entire geography, if you will, of humanity. Everybody on planet Earth, going back as far as we know, and start to understand where we fit in the big picture of humans, because everybody's related to somebody else in some way. This will give us a tremendous tool in understanding all of the diseases, the healthcare issues. It'll help us understand kind of how to protect ourselves, how to maintain our own identity. There's lots of identity issues that'll be tied in with this as well. So understanding this whole geography of humanity is going to be a massive project that sometime in the future is going to get funded, and we're going to know how all this fits together. And the last one is a global blockchain infrastructure. This is coming. Over the next few years, blockchain is probably a term that you will no longer hear. Blockchain is one that will become invisible. It's part of the global infrastructure. It's part of the global Wi-Fi network. It's part of everything. So as we're building this digital infrastructure over everything physical in the world, blockchain is part of the architecture that's going to make it all work as we create this global trust network that helps us trust everything that's going on. So here's a few questions to consider. How will the formation of mega projects begin to change the kind of work we do in the future? And what new opportunities do you see springing to life as a result of them? Now, with each of these mega projects, just consider if you have students that are growing up that will work in one of these industries in the future, what skills are they going to need to be functional in that industry? As my favorite physicist, Max Planck, likes to say, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. All right, let's touch on cryptocurrencies. This was part of the list yesterday, so we're going to continue on with that. So this is a staggering statistic that it kind of blew me away when I actually heard about this. But Bitcoin mining accounts for roughly 1% of all the world's energy consumption. So it takes roughly 1% of all the world's energy to just mine Bitcoin. So one of our big problems in the world is money in all of its current forms is becoming increasingly dysfunctional. If you try to use cash to buy an airline ticket, to check into a hotel, if you try to use gas or cash to rent a car, there's lots of things that they don't allow you to do if you're paying cash for it. If you're using your signature to give a secure sign, to notarize something, to sign for something, there's lots of problems with that. I have a friend that every time he goes into a store and they make him sign his name onto something, he always looks at the name of the cashier and he signs their name rather than his own name, and he's never been stopped. If we look at the credit and debit cards, they're losing the confidence wars. We're seeing security breaches happening on an ever more frequent basis. And it's almost every week we hear some major security breach, and these big companies are having to fix this problem. And so we haven't created a durable system yet. So in 2008, we had a major recession. The world was in bad shape because, and then the big banks were very arrogant. They said that we're too big to fail, and if anything needs to survive, the banking system needs to survive, and that irritated a lot of people. And it especially irritated Satoshi Nakamoto, the mysterious guy that created Bitcoin, because out of this, he launched Bitcoin, and it first started in January of 2009. So this is supposed to be an anonymous cryptocurrency, but it's not really anonymous. And rather than traditional national currencies get loaned into existence, cryptocurrencies get mined into existence. The mining process ends up being a form of scarcity. So it limits the number of new coins that can be put into circulation at any given time. This is similar to these giant coins that were used on the island of Yap in New Guinea. See, Bitcoin is a lot like real estate. If you buy and sell a house, the house stays where it is and you just change the ownership on that house. That's the way it was with these giant coins. They would just change the ownership on these coins, and that's similar to the way Bitcoin works. Bitcoin stays in the cloud. You don't put Bitcoin in your pocket. Bitcoin stays in the cloud, and you just change the ownership on it, and that's where the blockchain comes in, because the blockchain is the giant ledger that keeps track of all that activity. So we have to ask this question: is embracing Bitcoin the equivalent of embracing the ARPANET-like web in the 1970s or 1980s? Now, before we had the internet, we had the ARPANET. It was a very crude forerunner to the internet, and nobody paid much attention to it then. They didn't pay much attention to it, and it didn't work very well. But with lots of iterations of improvement, it became what we know today as the World Wide Web. So there are 5 features in cryptocurrency that make it very noteworthy. The first one is it's open. It's not confined by borders. It's not restricted with any laws or anything. It's borderless. It's decentralized, so we don't have one central failure point in any of the cryptocurrency world. It's neutral, so it doesn't favor one country over another country. We're not going to put tariffs on Bitcoin. That's just not going to work. And it's censorship resistant. So it's designed to resist people trying to control it. So these features make it rather interesting, and give it unique and different characteristics than any of the currencies we've encountered in the past. So assuming there's going to be a universal global currency in the future, will it be a Bitcoin-like cryptocurrency? My personal thinking is that even if today's cryptocurrencies fail, they're going to fail forward, and the next generation of cryptocurrencies will be much more resistant than ever before, and so it's going to open the doors for an entirely new world. So if we look at where we've come from, when we first came out with the cars, these horseless carriages, you know, as soon as we had horseless carriages, everybody says, "Oh, good, we have cars. We can drive cars around." And no, they never said that. What they actually said is, "Oh, that's another toy for rich people. That'll never happen." But the early cars that came out, they had to drive on the same roads that horse and buggies drove on. That was less than ideal. Eventually, we started designing much more sophisticated roads for them to drive on. So the businesses that were taking care of the horse and buggies, the blacksmith shops that would put horseshoes on the horses and help repair the stagecoaches, those eventually gave way to the gas stations. And these gas stations then were the ones that helped the cars, the early cars, as they traveled across country. And so eventually dirt roads were replaced by modern highways. And that's the same in the electrical world. Our crude systems we use for transmitting electricity in the past have given way to big power lines. There's an interesting story about the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower was first introduced, or the Eiffel Tower was part of the 1889 World's Fair. And that World's Fair is the first time electricity was demonstrated in public. And the mayor of Paris at that time, he made this bold statement. He laughed about electricity, and he says, as soon as the World's Fair is over, and as soon as the Eiffel Tower is dismantled, he says, we'll never hear about electricity ever again in our lives. What's funny about that is, I like to say that the only reason we still have electricity today is because the Eiffel Tower is still standing. But the early internet had to operate on the same phone lines as the ones that were optimized for human voice. And so the early internet had a kind of a crowded starting point as a rough existence. So eventually, though, the switchboard operators in the phone industry gave way to self-dialing telephones. And then the dial-up modems in the computer world were replaced with fiber modems. And so several iterations of change made it much better. And so cryptocurrencies have grown up in a world dominated by banking infrastructure. So it's less than ideal. So cryptocurrencies have to use existing infrastructure in order to operate, and that hasn't been optimized for cryptocurrencies yet. So what will a cryptocurrency-oriented infrastructure look like? At this point, we can only guess what that'll look like. But if we think about the scaling of Bitcoin, if Bitcoin is worth, there's a total of 21 million Bitcoins that can be mined into existence, and about 3/4 of those have been mined already. But if each Bitcoin is worth $1,000, that creates a $21 billion economy. If they're each worth $10,000, that's a $210 billion economy. If they're each worth $1 million, that's a $21 trillion economy that they create. Now keep in mind that every Bitcoin can be subdivided into 100 million bits. So that then becomes enough to be a global currency. So we've actually produced over 50,000 new millionaires as in Bitcoin alone in the last couple years. Now, there's lots of well-known people that are weighing in on this. Christine Lagarde has just taken over as the director of the European Central Bank. And in her last position as the head of the IMF, she made this statement. She said, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies could displace central banks and conventional banking and challenge the monopolies of money. And when somebody like this says something like that, we have to pay attention. But then she goes on to say that it's inevitable that cryptocurrencies will have to be regulated by government in some way. So we'll see where this all evolves into the future. But as the value of cryptocurrencies started to go up, everything started to get worth more and more money. As the value went up, that inspired more and more people, developers and programmers in the background, to start creating all this infrastructure to support the cryptocurrency world. So we now have a tremendous amount of infrastructure built up in the background. This is hidden from view. The general public does not know all this activity went on in the past. But that has given rise to a much more durable cryptocurrency industry. But there's still problems. We don't have a good legal system. If somebody steals your cryptocurrency, how do you resolve that conflict? How do you get that money back? There's no dependent constituency. See, every national currency has their own constituency. Each country has its own people, and so that currency has an obligation to support the people in that country. Now with cryptocurrencies, they're all global in nature, so there is no central constituency for any of these currencies. And so there's no overall economic responsibilities for any of them. And at the same time, I think coexistence is the key. So I think that the national currencies have to somehow coexist with cryptocurrencies. Now we have quite a few major companies that have announced that they want to create their own cryptocurrencies. This will start happening in the next few months here with Facebook's Libra that's going to come out, and we'll see how well that does and if people actually accept it and use it. But JP Morgan, PayPal, Apple, Google, Visa, all of them plan to unleash their own cryptocurrency sometime in the near future. So it opens the door for lots of other unusual things to happen as well. So Genesis Capital, as an example, has been making loans in Bitcoin, and they've actually loaned out $1.1 billion just last year alone, and that number keeps climbing. So if you want to buy a house, can you get a loan in Bitcoin to buy that house or to buy that car? So we're looking at these coming fintech wars. So within 5 years, mobile devices will replace credit cards, debit cards, wallets, lenders, brokers, insurance agents, money transfers abroad. Or will they? Is that really going to happen? Maybe, maybe not. And if it does happen, what part of this will still be controlled by the current banking system? So how does the changing of the guard actually change, or does it? So in the future, when we make a payment, we can make a payment through our phone or through our watch or maybe through our jewelry. When we go to an ATM machine, does it recharge our phone? Does it recharge our watch? Does it recharge our jewelry or our shoes? In China, they've made this rapid transition, so they pretty much don't use cash anymore. They don't use credit cards there. Everybody is either using Alipay or WeChat Pay. There are right now, there's over 30 debit cards that you can load Bitcoin onto and just use it as a regular credit card. So this idea of actually having a currency agnostic debit card so that you can load any form of money onto it and then just use it as a regular credit card. Is that the world that we're moving into, or is it something else? And so our ability to talk back and forth to machines is changing the dynamics. It's changing the relationship with money. And so very soon we're going to be all talking back and forth to our ATM machines, to our watches, to our phones, and voice commerce is going to be a hot topic in the near future. So in the US, we have a little over 90,000 buildings, branch banks for the banking industry, and we've been closing roughly 1,000 every year. And so it begs the question that if you can do everything on your phone, why do you need the real estate? Why do you need these buildings to support this banking industry? So it looks to me like we're going to have a banking building apocalypse happening very soon. So is Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, are they a friend or a foe? Are they working for us or against us? And who has the power to decide? I think it's a great question. So my prediction is that by 2030, over 25% of national currencies will have been replaced by cryptocurrencies. And that this will open the door for tons of micro industries, cryptocurrency banks, insurance companies, loans and mortgages, coaches, advisors, investors, so much more. So these are the same questions we were wrestling with yesterday. How dramatically will your life be affected by cryptocurrencies and blockchain over the next 10 to 20 years? And what jobs will be eliminated and what new jobs will be created and what new skills will be needed to have people work in these industries in the future? All right, 3D printing. I love the 3D printing topic. This is Professor Lee Cronin. Lee Cronin is a professor at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. He believes that in the very near future, any pharmaceutical drugs that you take, we're going to be able to 3D print them in our own homes. And if you're taking 10 different pills every day, he thinks that we're going to be able to 3D print everything into a single pill, and we're going to be able to hyper-individualize the dosage so it's specifically designed for you at that given moment in time. See, lots of the drugs today, the doctors can prescribe 200 milligrams or 400 milligrams, but the ideal dosage for you might be 137 milligrams or 368 milligrams. But we don't have the ability to work with that level of precision, not just yet anyway. He thinks that that's coming. In the past, we've seen prosthetic limbs that have been 3D printed, and they were all pretty crude, pretty much home-designed amateur devices. Now they're becoming much more sophisticated. We can 3D print up to 150 prosthetic eyes in an hour. And we have the ability to print with living tissue. Again, this is not quite ready for prime time. There's a lot of experimenting going on with this, but it's coming very close. And 3D printing a heart like this or some other organ, we can now print with working blood vessels. So the blood actually circulates through them. Again, we're not quite ready to turn this on so that all the doctors are working with these things yet, but we're getting very close. I like to ask the question, how long will it be before I can 3D print a replacement body for myself? I want something that's a little better looking, more hair in his head, that is a lot smarter. Is this what we're moving to here? Are we moving into that? I think I'll wear the head with the big smile on it today. It just seems right. So last January, this company 3D printed a house in Russia, and they printed it in less than 24 hours. It's a small house, but they did it very quickly. So that entire house was printed in less than 24 hours, less than a day, for a cost of less than $10,000 roughly. It's not a very big house, but it actually looks pretty nice. An Italian architect believes that we're going to be able to design our own units for high-rise buildings, and then once we design them, we'll have them 3D printed on the top of the building, and then we'll use a crane and lower them down and insert them into the building. So is that how we're going to create high-rise buildings in the future? Well, maybe. This is what most people are thinking. Most people are thinking that we'll set up a rig like this around a construction site, and in less than 24 hours, we'll be able to 3D print an entire building. But as the technology improves, we're not just 3D printing the structure, we're also 3D printing the wiring in the walls, the plumbing in the walls, the cabinets in the kitchen, the toilets, the sinks. We're 3D printing the entire building in less than a day. And then if we get tired of that building, all we have to do is grind it up and reprint it. If your wife or your husband gets mad at you someday, you might come home to an all-new house. We don't even have to clean it first. Once we're able to 3D print a wall, we no longer have the need for flat walls. Every wall can become an artistic centerpiece. Architects are going to go crazy with this because they can create these free-form structures unlike anything we have today. And our very definition of what a house is, what a condo is, what's an apartment, what an office is, all of these things start to change once we have this new capability. So how long before 3D printing becomes a better option? So I will point out that the people in Dubai think that by 2030, that 30% of all their construction will take place with 3D printers. 2030, in 10 years, 30% of all the construction will happen this way. So this is a fascinating video to watch here. They're building a part of a spaceship here. Naturally, this is speeded up, but it gives you an idea of how quickly these things can take shape. In Amsterdam, they 3D printed a bridge. It took several months to do that. They printed it out of stainless steel, but they printed a bridge. So this technology is infiltrating all different aspects of life. So my prediction is that in just a few years here, we're going to have over 10,000 different materials to work with 3D printers. It's quite impressive, the sheer number of materials we can work with today. In that this is going to open the doors for tons of micro industries, 3D printed buildings, clothing, furniture, food, pharmaceuticals, and just so much more. As my favorite physicist, William Gibson says, or science fiction writer William Gibson says, he says, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. All right, lab-grown meats. In 2015, I spent a couple days with Mark Post. Mark Post is the guy out of Holland that actually created the world's first lab-grown hamburger. Now, Mark is a real geeky guy. He's fun to talk to, fun to bounce ideas off of. And if somebody says that the meat that he's grown is a little too dry or needs more marbling or something, he says, okay, well, we can engineer that into it. We can do that. So in his laboratory, in a company called Mosa Meats in Holland, they actually devised the first system for creating lab-grown meats. Now, they're working with stem cells from animals, and they put them into these vats, and it takes 8 to 10 weeks to grow a batch of meat. Now, this is a similar growing process, but you're not growing the meat on an animal, you're growing it in a vat. And so the price of the meat has been dropping quite a bit. When I was talking to him, he was speculating that maybe he could get it down to $100 a pound. And I thought, well, nobody's going to buy that. It's way too expensive. And then the next year it dropped to $60 a pound, and the next year after that it was under $13 a pound. And now it's getting down, so it's less than any other meat on the market. So this is going to give rise to what I think is lots of exotic meats, because we could focus on some of the traditional beef, pork, chicken, and fish, but I think that starting off this industry, they're going to focus on the things that nobody's producing yet, things like wombat meat, penguin meat, bumblebee meat. I mean, I can't tell you the last time I had a good bumblebee steak. That was a long time ago. So we could actually produce human meat. Now, there's a lot of people that cringe at the idea of actually creating human meat. But there are companies out there that are making human materials, leathers. So we could actually create leathers from humans. And my thinking is that we're probably going to have people go to the celebrities, and they're going to get some of their stem cells, and then we will have certified George Clooney purses or Brad Pitt purses, or any famous person can create their own products as a result of this. So my prediction is by 2030, over 100 kinds of exotic meats will be available in supermarkets. And each one of them will have their own testimonials. And this is going to give rise to tons of micro-industries, industrial meat production plants, meat designers, meat chefs, meat nutritionists, and just so much more. Now, it begs the question that if somebody is a vegetarian today, a lot of vegetarians just don't like the idea of harming animals. So is this going to open the doors so those vegetarians will eat this kind of meat? Maybe. There's lots of unknowns when we start dealing with this. So some of the future jobs that would get created, material experts, design engineers, 3D printed ink developers, food printer chefs, 3D printed clothing, fashion designers, material specialists and stylists, organ agents. The 3D printing world is going to open the door for tons of new types of jobs that we can't even imagine just yet. Once again, we ask these central questions. How much of today's world will be affected by 3D printing technology in 10 to 20 years? In what jobs will it eliminate, and what new jobs will it create, and what new skills will be needed to work and function in this industry in the future? All right, the last one that we're going to touch on is mixed reality, VR and AR. A lot of work being done in this area. Next generation VR, AR, we're going to be able to do lots more climate research. And we're going to be able to take a storm system, bring it down into our laboratory. We're going to be able to look at it from lots of different angles. We're going to be able to study it and analyze it in ways that we haven't in the past. Using VR as a form of trauma therapy. If somebody's in a car accident, or they've been involved in a shooting, or involved in war, they have lots of psychological issues. This can help get them past that. And this idea of playing video games in the future, many of these are going to become a super aerobic workout, because it's no longer just sitting on a couch and pushing buttons. You're going to be able to have to physically get involved to shoot at the right angle and everything to make this work. It's going to be much more engaging, much more energizing. Designing new products, when we can actually create a three-dimensional form and bring it into a room with us and actually look at it from many different angles, then we can start to understand how this all comes together. We're going to have to train our robots, and this is going to be a great tool for doing that. When we have crisis situations around the world, it will give us the tools for simulating those crises and actually train people to be better equipped to dealing with them. Holographic theaters. I love this idea of having a theater in the round so that every person is sitting around the outside of the action that's happening in the middle, and you have 50-foot tall famous actors that are running across the stage. So every place you sit, you will see it from a little different angle. So very likely in a lot of these movies, you're going to want to see it from many different angles. The SwarmBot demonstrations. So rather than actually physically creating all the SwarmBots, we'll be able to do all the research on that up front. And the theme parks of the future are going to have us immersed in things in ways that we can never imagine in the past. All right, this gives rise to the idea of digital twins. Now, digital twins is not a term that a lot of people use yet, but everything in the physical world, we have the ability to put sensors on it and create a digital twin of that, whether it's a cruise ship or whether it's a giant piece of equipment, a front-end loader like this, or whether it's a turbine in a power plant. We can create a digital twin of that. And if something goes wrong, then somebody a long ways away on the other side of the world can actually analyze it and see what happened and then devise a solution for that problem. So the next generation of digital twin technologies, this gives rise to what's known as remote robotics. So somebody can do an operation on another person, a doctor can do an operation on another person that's in another city or another country, and they don't have to physically be in the same room with that person, because that's remote robotics. So people that are farmers can operate the equipment from a long ways away. So being able to operate a combine or a tractor or a sprayer, all of these things can be done from a long ways away. And it gives rise to the question of how long will we still need pilots to fly the airplanes? Can we have somebody on the ground operating, some pilot on the ground operating that aircraft? Very likely, we will probably start eliminating co-pilots, and then the next step would be to eliminate the pilot themselves. And then it also gives rise to this question of how long before a digital twin technology becomes part of the healthcare world, in that we can create a digital twin of our personal body. How long before doctors can monitor somebody's health remotely through their digital twin? That's coming. That's coming very soon. So some of the future jobs this will create is experience creators, entertainment designers, VR therapy specialists, digital twin engineers, three-dimensionologists, crisis management instructors, new product designers, and just so much more. How much of today's business world will be affected by VR and AR and digital twin technology in 10 to 20 years? And what jobs will they eliminate, and what new jobs will they create, and what new skills will be needed to operate in this environment? Now, in going through all of these, I'm hoping to stretch your imagination. I'm hoping to give you new dimensions of understanding all the different realms of future technology, so that it's not just one thing. It's not just one thing that's going to change our future. It's lots of things. We're going to go off in thousands of different directions, creating thousands of different opportunities. Kevin Kelly is a futurist like myself. He lives in Silicon Valley. He's very well known. He makes this statement. He says, the future happens very slowly and then all at once. Now, this is, I think, a really important question because usually with new technology, it starts off slowly and then it goes up this exponential growth curve and things happen much quicker then. So when it comes to this topic of quantum computing, most of you probably didn't know what a quantum computer looks like. It looks kind of like a chandelier hanging from a ceiling. It's a weird looking thing. But on October 23rd this year, Google made the claims that they achieved what's called quantum supremacy. So quantum supremacy is hard to get your mind wrapped around because it speeds up computing power in such a massively huge way. So Google's quantum computer called Sycamore completed a task in 200 seconds that the world's most powerful supercomputers would need 10,000 years to accomplish. So 200 seconds versus 10,000 years. So it's like adding 1,000,000 times more computing power to one application. But then IBM raised their hand and they said, well, it didn't take 10,000 years. Our supercomputer did it in 2.5 days. But still, going from 2.5 days to 200 seconds is quantum leap of improvement. It's massively huge. So was this Google's Sputnik moment? Is this one of those earth-changing technologies? Suddenly the world shifted because of that event on October 23rd. In a word, yes. I think so. I think this is equivalent to the Wright brothers flying their first flight. I think it's equivalent to Tim Berners-Lee launching the first website, Deep Blue beating Garry Kasparov, Steve Jobs unveiling the iPhone in 2007. I think this is as significant as any of those moments in history. But there's a challenging road ahead for quantum computing, and it's the big unknown. So the first part is we don't have the reliability yet. Quantum computing is a very unstable environment. So while they got it to work for 200 seconds, can they get it to work for 40 days straight? Maybe not. We don't know what the best programming language is to use on quantum computing. We don't know what the best database structures are, the overall path to implementation. But theoretically, there's a huge upside to quantum computing because when we can apply 1,000,000 times more computing power to a problem, then theoretically we can find a cure for every disease on the planet Earth. Human longevity will go up exponentially, so suddenly we have people living 200, 300, 400 years. Space travel and colonizing other planets become possible because we can solve all these problems much quicker and faster on the spot. And this idea of unlimited free energy, maybe it's right around the corner, maybe not. But there's a downside to quantum computing as well. Suddenly, all the encryption systems we use today will be breakable. That's estimated that that's between now and sometime within the next 5 years that we're going to have to move to quantum level encryption on everything we're doing. All cryptocurrencies get mined instantly. So like within the next hour, then all the cryptocurrencies get mined. Blockchain becomes, potentially blockchain has a broken technology because somebody devises a way to break through it. Now, can we create a quantum level blockchain? Maybe. The stock markets, I don't think are viable anymore, not in their current form. So how do we make quantum level stock markets? How do we make quantum level gambling industry? Because there's no such thing as a true game of chance anymore. All of these things become serious issues that we have to wrestle with. So once again, how much of today's business world will be affected by quantum computing in 10 to 20 years? What jobs will they eliminate? What new jobs will they create? And what new skills are needed to operate in this industry? So the future is ours to write. See, always remember that the future is never a destination, but forever a journey. By 2030, each one of us will own printed clothing, live in a printed house, have packages delivered by drones, own more than one robot, work as a freelancer, frequently use driverless cars, and will be capable of accomplishing 10 times as much as the average person today. We're entering a period of unprecedented opportunity. Why is this so unprecedented? Because humanity is going to change more in the next 20 years than in all human history. At the same time, our risk factors are going to go up exponentially. As we become more and more dependent on technology, more things can go wrong, more things are going to break. And our children's children who haven't even been born yet, they're counting on you. They're counting on the people in this room to make great decisions. As Steve Jobs says, this right now is one of those moments when you are influencing the future. But sometimes our best efforts just look a lot like this. Yeah, pretty much just like that. So for those of you who are interested, this is my latest book, Epiphany Z. And I thank you very much. If you want any more information about what we do at the Da Vinci Institute, send me a newsletter or sign up at our website. And I thank you very much for having me here today. Thank you.